I want to talk about a relationship that you introduced a lot of America to, that's among the deepest and most interesting in American history. Is the friendship between Ulysses Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman.
Yeah.
I remember living in Washington, D.C. during my days there, and I would frequently go out and hike the Manassas battlefield, which you could get around in about 8 miles. And out in the woods, there's a little marker where Colonel William Tecumseh Sherman makes his debut for the Union Army on a battlefield with all of Washington, D.C.'s elites around on the hillside to watch the day's activities, appalled by the slaughter as the defeated Union troops stream back into Washington, and Sherman rises to become Grant's indispensable partner, the great battle captain of the Southern Front. And Sherman introduces a strategy of total war that prefaces the wars of the 20th century. The American Civil War, by casualty count, by industrial might, the person who applies these tactics, integrated movement, a modern army. By the time you get to City Point in 1865, this is a 20th century army, 35 years early, the most powerful in the world. And Sherman does nothing on the plains that he doesn't do to the Confederacy.
That's exactly right. I would say, I would amend your absolutely correct thing is, and that friendship is so poignant at times. Grant had a reputation in the early years as being a drunkard, and Sherman went home with some form of mental illness for a while. And, Sherman said he stood by me when I was crazy, and I stood by him when he was drunk, and we now stand by each other together. His Southern strategy is not the total war. Our Civil War is not a civil war. It's a sectional war, North against South. His attack is not against civilians. There are very few civilian deaths outside of Missouri and Kansas, which begins before the Civil War and extends well afterward. Our revolution is a civil war, and we think of it more as a gentleman's war, and it's not. Just really hands-on, Native American, Black, German immigrants, Irish immigrants, ne'er-do-wells. That's the Continental Army, not the sturdy militiamen that we see in the statues on the Lexington Green. They play an important part, but it's a different and less permanent one. Our Civil War, though, he brings a total war to we would call it the industrial heart of the South. That is to say, the plantations. Doesn't kill anybody. No white women are raped by his soldiers in the course of it. All the tropes and lies of the Churchill said the winners write the history, but the South wrote the history of the Civil War. And that's why Reconstruction is seen as a bad period. All of these things, why the Confederate Army is still with us, right? And why we had the big discussion about monuments, which didn't come up at the time. They were later put in after the collapse of Reconstruction, or the Dixie flag into the flags of the old Confederate states, which came in after 1954. And correct me if I'm wrong, there's only one significant event in 1954, and that's a Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education. And then all of a sudden it shows up. So somehow the heritage part doesn't work. In any case, Sherman is a brilliant tactician, and it is combined with what's going on with Grant up north outside of Petersburg, which is trench warfare, and what's happening in the prison camps of the North as well as the South, particularly Andersonville. You're looking at the 20th century, a kind of preview of the 20th century, as you quite accurately say it. And then they're going to take it west. And Phil Sheridan, one of the principal generals, is going to say the famous thing, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Even the progressive Friends of the Indians who create schools have a slogan, kill the Indian, save the man. These are the friends of the Indian. And they don't mean kill him physically. They mean destroy his culture, cut off his hair, dress him in regular dress, beat him if he speaks, and children, beat them if they speak their native tongues. And so the Carlisle Indian School is just one of these places that is a kind of, we would call it a bleeding heart, attempt to do this. Sheridan wants them all dead. The good people want them just completely drained of any cultural thing. And so, one of the things that the buffalo and its restoration symbolizes is the possibility of repair, which is a huge theme in American history. Like, what do we repair? The gap between North and South, the gap between Black and white, now obviously the gap between Native and newcomers. And you have to realize when you say the word American, you have to understand they're all Americans, all of them. Enslaved people, freed Blacks, women, none of whom, Native Americans, none of whom are recognized by our spectacular experiment in democracy that begins with the Declaration of Independence.
When is the American West finally completely, by your estimation, subjugated? And what is the moment where and how we arrive at an understanding from tens and tens of millions of these animals, these magnificent animals? There are 77 left.
Yeah. So the 1890s is really it. It's the end of the slaughter ends at the end of the 1880s because you can't find any buffalo to kill anymore. And it's that, I mean, when most people think about the vast middle, the plains of the United States, just tactically how big it is. And the idea that there could be 77 or 26 or 600, whatever the number might be, it's spread out over, people cannot find it. There's an essay by Frederick Jackson Turner in the early 90s that said the frontier is closed. And it causes Americans this great soul searching. There's already a nascent conservation movement, as I've talked about. George Bird Grinnell, TR, formed the Boone and Crockett Club. The Audubon Society is created. People are trying to save animals after witnessing what happens to the beaver and the passenger pigeon, which is extinct. It used to be in the billions. And so there's the buffalo gone. And all of a sudden, there's a sense that the thing that is really at the heart of our identity are these things that we've spent a long time trying to get rid of. And so to me, the apotheosis of this insanity is in 1913 when we come out with the Indian head nickel. We know who the Indian is modeled after, and we know the name of the buffalo that goes, it was sculpted up here in Midtown, and the buffalo was sent to the meat packing district to be packaged out and eaten, right? And we know what happened to this buffalo. But what are we doing? We are beginning to romanticize and even fetishize, I would suggest, an animal and a human being that we have spent the last century trying to get rid of. And so George Horsecapture Jr. again comes on and just says in wonderment, like, I have to ask you, why do you kill the things you love? And Joni Mitchell said it, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And I think there was a sense that we were paving paradise, and something had to be done. Wallace Stegner wrote this great quote that sort of is part of the introduction of our second of two episodes, where we begin to pull out of the nosedive of the eradication of the buffalo. And he says, human beings are the most dangerous species on Earth, and every other species and the Earth itself has cause to be fearful. But we're also the only species that when we want to can save another. And so I think what we're talking about is things I've heard you speak about many times, and I've tried to be a thematic, is that we have this ability at any given moment to be called by our better angels. And what is going to obtain in the American story? Is it going to be that impulse, the darker, more aggressive impulse that makes an other of everyone and of an animal? Or is it something that tries to understand about coexistence? I mean, I like to phrase it really simply. I make films about the US, but I also make films about us. That is to say, the lowercase 2-letter plural pronoun, all the intimacy of us and we and our, and all of the majesty, the complexity, the contradiction, and even the controversy of the US. And that is a great privilege to have spent nearly 50 years of my life, in that field, plowing those acres and trying to come to terms with it. And it always seems to be a tension between these impulses. We struggle with it today in the three greatest crises leading up to here, the Civil War, the Depression, and World War II, in some ways don't even compare to the current fourth crisis, because all of those events took place where there was no question about the peaceful transfer of power, free and fair elections, the independence of the judiciary, respected free press. Now all of those things are called into question. And so once again, we're being asked to call on our better angels. I know I go back to the Declaration. I'm working on a big history right now of the American Revolution, which is not your father's or grandfather's revolution, in which Jefferson, a few sentences after the famous second sentence of the Declaration, says, "All experience has shown that mankind are disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to throw off." And everybody focuses on the throw off, meaning as a justification for revolution. But what he's saying is, look, we're proposing something altogether different. The entire history of mankind has been to be under someone's authoritarian rule. And we're disposed to suffer while those evils are sufferable. But now we're asking something else of you. We're asking a more responsible citizenship. And in return, we will trust you, us, to govern. And that's the American compact. And when we get distracted from it, we realize the extent to which we are still disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, to buy the line of the demagogue or the authoritarian or whatever it might be, wherever it raises its head.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss a video. Also, for more content just like this, please consider joining our Warning Premium community. You can find out more in the description below.